You're listening to The Residential Movement, where the focus is on making in-home dental care normal instead of novel or niche. I'm your host, Dr. Ashley Robinson, a house call dentist with a lot of passion for reaching patients who are best served in their home or residence. I'm here to encourage, equip, and empower dentists like you to begin offering in-home dental services for patients who cannot get to the office, while also enjoying a more balanced work life. We discuss everything from dentistry, business, ethics, mindset, and more. Listen in to learn how you can become a part of the residential movement. Thanks for tuning in today. I want to share something that I don't typically share here, a story about a specific patient of mine. The story of my relationship with this patient is one that demonstrates just how important house call dentistry is and how meaningful this work can be. It also addresses some clinical and ethical questions that listeners have asked me before. So here is the story of James Doe. James called my practice to make his first appointment over a year ago. He stated that he just wanted me to come and address one specific problem he was having. A sharp tooth was cutting his tongue. A week or so later, when I arrived at his home, I was greeted by his wife, Elaine. She directed me through the maze of their charming home, and there he was, the man of the hour, my patient, James. He was seated in a recliner in the family room, and that's where he'd remained throughout our appointment. We introduced ourselves, and I began my routine. I reviewed his medical history and began setting up my materials. As you can imagine, it takes me a little while to set everything up, so during this time, I just chat with my patients. Most of them appreciate this time to connect with someone other than their routine caregivers, but James really appreciated my ear. During this time and throughout our first appointment, he told me all about his 5 kids and his grandchildren. He pointed to their pictures throughout the house. He told me the story of how he met his wife of many years. He also told me about his time in the service and his decades-long career at a local corporation that sent him traveling all over the world. I loved learning about the exciting life that this man lived before he was confined to the recliner in front of me. During the visit, I did my limited exam and used a diamond to smooth out the sharp edge of a non-restorable tooth that had been driving him bonkers. He was relieved and very grateful. I also had to tell him, James, I know you only wanted me here to address that specific pain point, but I see other problems going on with your teeth. I recommended having me back another time to do a full exam so that we can come up with a plan. He actually agreed, which surprised me. A lot of my patients in his position do not opt for comp exams. I wish more of them did, but they don't, and I respect that. So weeks later, I returned to James's house for a comp oral. I took radiographs, completed a prophy, noted treatment needs, and did everything that you would do at such an appointment. James and Elaine heard my report, but they wanted some time to decide which treatment plan to pursue. They had some decisions to make. Should they arrange for transportation to an oral surgeon for extractions or just live with asymptomatic non-restorable teeth? Should they have me apply SDF everywhere or opt for standard restorations? Of course, I shared my recommendations with them, but they still wanted some time to consider everything. After this appointment, his wife Elaine followed me out to my car. I think she was surprised to see my tiny Corolla at the time, but I told her that it works, and she laughed. But soon she was in tears. She was so overwhelmed by her husband's condition, and she needed more support. I was able to connect her to a few agencies in town, and then I just gave her a hug, because being a caregiver is a very difficult task for anyone. It's wild because we all know that if we're lucky, we'll age. We will most likely be a caregiver or someone who needs caregiving, but when we step into these roles, it's still incredibly hard. A little while later, my assistant followed up with James, and he had made his decisions that are actually very typical of most of my patients. He opted not to arrange for transportation to an oral surgeon. His non-restorable teeth weren't bothering him, and leaving the house was too big of a hassle. He opted for SDF placement on posterior teeth because, quote, nobody can see them anyway. And finally, he wanted anterior teeth to have traditional restorations because he cares about his appearance. His priorities are very representative of most of my patients' priorities. So with a plan in place, he asked me to come back ASAP. This time, I was greeted by an aide. Elaine was out to lunch with a girlfriend, and I was really happy for her. She needed it. Based on our previous time together, James knew he could only tolerate so much treatment at each visit, so he wanted to take care of the most teeth at once by putting SDF on all of the posterior lesions. So that's what we did. It was painless. He said, hey, I didn't want to ask before, but I can't help it. Are you expecting? I said yes, and I told him when I was due. He was so excited for me. He asked if I should really be lugging around all of this equipment in my condition, and I laughed and told him I appreciated his concern, but that I was all good. I told him I'd be back soon to begin the anterior restorations. Well, when it came time to confirm his next op appointment, Elaine told my assistant that James had had a significant decline in health and he was moved to an assisted living facility that doesn't allow outside health professionals in. This was a huge bummer. I assumed that was the end of my time with James. Some of my patient relationships have ended this way. Luckily, I was wrong. After just a few months, he was back home. He called me to come back and restore these front teeth finally. But when I visited his home this time, things were remarkably different. He was no longer in his recliner in the family room. He was now in a hospital bed in a first-floor bedroom. Rheumatoid arthritis set in, and it looked really bad. He no longer had the use of his hands. James told me about the months he spent living in a care facility. He explained that sometimes they'd be short-staffed, and the only real aid he'd received during the day was being cleaned up after a bowel movement. Dental care and oral hygiene were just not at all priorities for his caregivers there. They were really busy. It was frustrating to him, especially as he lost the use of his hands. This poor guy. Inevitably, the anterior decay accelerated. My eyeballs saw, but radiographs confirmed that 2 of these previously restorable lesions had now turned into pulpal decay. In that moment, I wish I'd pushed harder for SDF from the start. If only I'd had a crystal ball. So I encouraged him to change our plan. I recommended SDF application on the remaining decayed anterior teeth. I was nervous he'd be disappointed, but he actually sounded relieved. He used to care a lot more about aesthetics, but now, after the most recent illness that sent him out of the house, he just wants to stay as comfortable as possible. Instead of injections and drilling, I applied SDF and he was done for the day. Everyone was happy. I was all cleaned up and almost out the door when he said, "Excuse me, isn't someone new living with you at your place these days?" How could I forget to show him pictures of my new little baby? He called Elaine into the room and the 2 of them were so excited to see the photos. Elaine told me that she thinks I'm very wise to be in a position with total control over my work schedule. She stayed home with her young children and said that it was the best time of her life. And that's saying a lot since her oldest is over 50 and she's lived a lot of life since then. Next, James looked up at me from his hospital bed and told me his biggest regret. He said that he took work way too seriously. He worked overtime and traveled and missed birthdays. He wishes he had all that time back to be with his young family. He warned me not to work too hard and to enjoy every second with my baby. I told him not to worry because I already totally subscribed to that way of life. If you've listened to this podcast before, you know that I view time as my most precious resource. It is finite. I'm very deliberate with my time. But when a patient like James gives me a reminder about time from a hospital bed, it's powerful to me. So I want to remind you that even when you win the rat race, you're still a rat. Spend your time doing things you enjoy with the people that you love. So I'll see James next month for hygiene and to talk more about our families. He's just a wonderful patient, and I thought his case could help you understand the workflow, treatment planning, and the relationships that you can form as a house call dentist. House call dentistry is unlike traditional chairside dentistry in all of the best ways. To learn more about the differences in the practice models, join me for my free masterclass, Own a Practice That Doesn't Own You. Visit residentialmovement.com/masterclass to enroll, or check the link in the show notes. Well, thanks for listening in today, and thank you for considering house call dentistry as a career choice. That's a wrap on this episode of The Residential Movement. If you like what you heard today, please leave a 5-star review and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you know someone who could benefit from this information, please share this with them. All of these actions help fuel the residential movement. Visit residentialmovement.com for show notes and for access to any links referenced in this episode. Thanks again for listening, Doc. Keep up the good work.